It's about high time we take a look at another video game company. But this one is special. Because not only are they known for the typical video game fare, but also edutainment. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the History of Brøderbund! It all started in 1979, after Gary Carlston had a hard time getting a job and went to live with his brother Doug in Eugene, Oregon. You see, Doug Carlston was a bit of a programmer and had made a few games for fun to pass the time. He had the idea for a game called Galactic Empire. It was a strategy video game proposed for the TRS-80, aka the TRS-80 microcomputer system, which was a desktop computer by the Tandy Corporation. It was once sold at Radio Shack, being one of the earliest mass-produced and mass-marketed retail home computers, with 4 to 48 kilobytes of memory. The game that Doug, an attorney, proposed originally was published by Adventure International. But there was a problem. His brother Gary needed a way to pay his rent, not to mention being $9,000 in debt.
Oh no!
So he suggested the idea of pitching finished copies of Galactic Empire to computer stores. This particular game series sparked the idea to create their own company, feeling biased to a name that meant Band of Brothers. Interestingly enough, Doug had a few years in Africa, perhaps because he was wanting to get out of America like his brother, and was beholden to use Swahili and Africans in his video game, which makes it all the more curious why he and his brother settled on a combination of Danish, Dutch, German, and Swedish instead. In a way, they ultimately came up with a word that was a mix of all of them, using the Afrikaans word broderbund, which actually means the association of brothers. They gave a little tweak to the spelling to be unique, and the result was Brøderbund. To make the name even more unique, they put in the O from the Dano-Norwegian alphabet, which doubled as a nod to slashed zeros on mainframes, terminals, and early personal computers. On their logo, they also have a reference to the lesser national coat of arms from Sweden via the 3 crowns you see on top. But before this name could be established, they had to sell some games, which is what Gary had to do. He managed to sell about $300 of games over the phone, though into 1980, he was only able to sell about $600 more. He even sold these games door to door, finding driving to video game stores a bit of a hassle, which wasn't a huge success at this point. That's when they had the idea of, instead of selling the games, they would give them away as
a free sample
to both journalists and stores to try their product, and this worked to drive sales. Not having to pay a dime to receive merchandise to sell was a pretty good deal, if you ask me. At this point, they were still using paper sleeves and plastic bags, mind you. That was when Gary and Doug came to the West Coast Computer Fair, with games in tow, all in arcade quality. By fate, this fair had put them next door to a Japanese company, StarCraft, whose representatives couldn't speak a word of English. It also had games, which were knockoffs of coin-operated Atari arcade titles. But there was one issue. They all played sideways. So hilariously, the monitors had to be rotated so the game was right side up. The brothers connected with them, and soon, a Nakazawa gives Gary a call, with really broken English, to their office, which is just their apartment, mind you, but they had a TRS-80 and an Apple II. one evening, Nakazawa came over and they chatted about current events, getting along well. But he dropped a truth bomb on the brothers. He knew they weren't a real company, so he gives them a deal that they can distribute their games, now fixed, with rights attached, depending on how many they can make copies of while Nakazawa is still there. They weren't given the masters either. By December 1980, they sold about $100,000 worth of games. By sheer luck, they made business with the most socially awkward businessman who only had one friend growing up, and it was Emperor Hirohito's second son. And they got the deal, apparently, because of Nakazawa seeing a Harvard magazine in the apartment. His peers saw him as silly, a merchant, but he saw himself as upper class. This one moment attracted some great American programmers to their company, mystified by the Japanese games programming. But here's the weirdest thing. The company they made a deal with weren't the ones that made the games. So it was a secondary company showing off the products. And even crazier, this company that was showing off the games went belly up. Something about not paying the game designers properly. However, this experience gave the brothers and other programmers valuable information, such as how to make these games by going to Japan themselves, instead of having to reverse engineer them all the entire time. For a while, they functioned like book publishers, getting an onslaught of outside submissions and getting them out, getting royalties for all of them, with the creators getting editorial feedback for their games and a percentage back. Essentially, they were a product-driven company. But enough of that. This is how Doug's original game was like.